Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this, the last session, actually, of the Energy Transition Hub at COP26. I'm Dan Sadler. I'm Vice President for UK Low Carbon Solutions at Equinor, and I'm joined by my colleagues on Zero Carbon Humber, Chris Newitt, who's the Senior Project Manager at National Grid Ventures, and Ben Morgan, who's the Research Director at the University of Sheffield's Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre.
Afternoon.
So the aim of today, or this short session, is really to walk you through the Zero Carbon Humber project ambitions and also how they link actually into the East Coast cluster, but specifically to really highlight some of the challenges around meeting the challenges of the Climate Change Act and big decarbonisation projects in industrial clusters and how we take them from concept to reality. So we're going to start off with a set of presentations actually from the three of us, which hopefully gives some good context to the discussion. So if I just start off on the first slide. Zero Carbon Humber is a consortium of 12 significant projects across the region, which include many of the industrial projects in the region, the likes of Drax, SSE, Salt and Chemical Park, Uniper, etc. Some of the infrastructure providers such as National Grid and Equinor, and of course the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, who you'll hear about in a little bit. So a real consortium of big companies with one common goal or one shared value, and that shared value is to get to a net zero position for these critical industrial clusters as soon as possible. You can see at the bottom there it says the East Coast cluster. So Zero Carbon Humber is the onshore element, and that connects to an offshore element under this brand of the East Coast cluster, which is where we do the CO2 transport and storage system. And that again is a consortium of very strong partners, which include BP, Equinor, National Grid, Shell and Total. So just a bit of context. Why now? Why are the stars aligning? And that's because in the UK, as we see it, there's the perfect combination of policy and legislation, government funding, business models and process to actually get these projects underway, to take that financial investment decision, construct and then operate. In terms of the policy and legislation position, the Committee on Climate Change set the net zero target in the 6th carbon budget, which the UK government accepted and committed to the legally binding targets of 78% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2035 and net zero by 2050. They're one of the first countries in the world to do that, and one of the only countries in the world to have those targets enshrined in law under the Climate Change Act. The UK government's 10-point plan sets out clear ambitions for hydrogen and CCS as critical cornerstones for net zero and industrial clusters and indeed across the wider economy, with 4 industrial clusters CCNSA enabled by 2030 and 5 gigawatts of installed hydrogen capacity, low carbon hydrogen capacity in the same timeline. They've also put in place funds, so a lot of these projects need development, which costs many tens of millions. So the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, which was a process run in previous years, allowed a formal relationship between private sector investment and public sector investment. And what that did is create a partnership between the private and public sector, again around a common goal of developing these projects to the point where you can take a final investment decision while sharing the higher risks of the upfront costs. Very important point. Then at the bottom left of your screen, you can see the business model consultation. You probably can't see them very clearly, but the government have done a lot of advanced work on the CCS business model as well as the hydrogen deployment business models. And what they are is commercial frameworks which take account of both the commercial necessities and the risks of building new nascent markets. And in this context, we're talking about new CCS and hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen enabled markets. First of a kind really anywhere in the world. And then the last point in the jigsaw, or rather the last two, is the government have also now going through a sequencing process called a cluster sequencing process. Phase 1 has just completed, and that's saying which clusters should connect first, or should we build the infrastructure around first, the CCS infrastructure, and that's been identified as the East Coast cluster and HyNet as the first clusters to deploy by the mid-20s, with the Scottish cluster in a reserve position. Phase 2 of the competition is now looking at which projects should be the first to connect to that infrastructure, to use the infrastructure to decarbonise their operations. That was launched this week, and that process will be announced over the next 4 to 5 months. The last piece of the jigsaw that everybody's waiting with bated breath on, and we may want to debate it a little bit today, is the affordability envelope. You know, doing something is never as cheap as doing nothing, but doing nothing is not one of our options. So what we have to do is be able to understand how fast or slow we want to go. And that's based on our appetite for cost and carbon savings. And the actual affordability envelope, how much you want to spend over how much time, is the thing that I believe the government will be announcing in 2022. So it's the piece of the jigsaw we're still waiting for. Onto this very messy slide. I won't spend long on this, but I think the key points there, look at the red star. Or it should maybe be a red cross, that one. And that's when there was the U-turn on CCS back in 2015. And I'm sure we can talk about that a bit later, but what's changed? Well, firstly, the urgency, the time has changed. But also we've now got a net zero target, not an 80% reduction target, which was the previous one, which means there's no hiding in the 20s. And as the Committee on Climate Change rightly point out, CCS is now a necessity, not an option. And hydrogen will play an important part in the future energy mix. The key arrow on that very messy slide is probably the one that's the green one with the yellow light around it, which was the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, the point I made earlier, where the government supported projects in each industrial region, including South Wales, Liverpool, Humberside, Teesside and Scotland, in terms of their development work to get to final investment decision. But the cluster sequencing process is the two arrows you can see below. The green one is phase 2. Where do we build the infrastructure first? The yellow one is the process, or amber if you like, on a traffic light system, of which projects are we going to support first to connect. So all the processes are in place. At the bottom there is the business models being developed. So what I would say is it's the perfect combination of policy, funding, private sector investment and ambition, and government direction to really start to pull this off, to start to make tangible impacts on climate change obligations. So the East Coast Cluster and Zero Carbon Humber and Net Zero Teesside, so just a bit of knowing your clusters. You may hear all of these. Today we're going to focus on Zero Carbon Humber, so what's the Humber doing? But actually Zero Carbon Humber is an industrial region. It's the biggest industrial region by a significant margin in the UK, with more emissions by a considerable margin than any other. Net Zero Teesside is the Teesside industrial region, another critically important region to the UK. And then the Northern Endurance Partnership is the offshore CO2 transport and storage system. And all of these have come together under the name the East Coast Cluster. On a bit of a more visual representation for you, you can see the map of the UK there. So for those less geographically familiar, the East Coast Cluster is located on the northeast corner, where you can see the two magenta, if that's the colour dots. You can see the infrastructure system connecting to the Endurance Store, which is one of the best geological stores in the UK continental shelf. And that infrastructure connects back to Teesside, there at the top of the screen, and down to Humber at the bottom of the screen. So the infrastructure is key, because without the infrastructure, the project ambitions, decarbonising power, creating hydrogen, decarbonising steel, is impossible, because it all needs the infrastructure to facilitate that transition. So this isn't just about, well, it is predominantly driven by climate change obligations, but what's the real benefits? What's the regional and national benefits? And the significant benefits in the context of jobs and economic growth. In terms of jobs, delivering the East Coast Cluster and all its initial phase of projects, we've estimated could create 25,000 jobs, both safeguarded and new, in both the direct, so working on the projects direct, but also the wider supply chain. And that's on average from now to 2050. There'd be a peak of 41,000 jobs across these regions in 2026. And that would give an average £2 billion worth of GVA benefit back to UK PLC every year from the day we take the final investment decision to 2050. But remember, this is phase one. You know, the UK still emits over 400 million tonnes of CO2 every year. The East Coast cluster is a big start, could decarbonise around 27 million tonnes. So a significant contribution, but not enough. You can see the blue line at the bottom is the job creation from this first phase. But the point is the first phase facilitates a next phase, facilitates a future phase, facilitates a future phase. And that's how we get to net zero. So what does that do? It compounds the jobs. So that 25,000, it's not unrealistic to assume that could extrapolate to around the 100,000 mark by 2050. You can see the targets from the Committee on Climate Change there. So 22 million tonnes of CCS by 2030 in the government's net zero strategy. That's now between 20 and 30 million tonnes per annum. 5 gigawatt target. By 2035, 53 million tonnes of CCS in the UK. That will be across all the industrial clusters. And then by 2050, 103 million tonnes of CCS with 225 to 375 terawatt hours of hydrogen. That's around 50 gigawatts of installed capacity. And that is a huge ambition with massive opportunity for economic prosperity. So the last slide before I pass over to Chris, just focusing in on the Humber a little bit. So for those less familiar, the Humber is a vast industrial region, a fantastic region actually. I live just at the end of it, and so does Ben. And actually what you've got is you've got gas coming in at the Easington terminal at the coast there that you can see. You have gas storage up in Aldeburgh. You come across inland and you can see the Saltend Chemicals Park. That's where Equinor have our H2H Saltend project, our Kickstarter for the low carbon hydrogen economy. And that chemical park alone produces more CO2 emissions than the Teesside or Liverpool industrial cluster in their entirety, producing 2 million tonnes of essential chemicals for global export every year. You go across the Humber and you find a third of the UK's refinery capacity, which is not just producing traditional refined materials, but also things like critical products for the manufacturer of electric vehicle batteries. Come inland further still and you've got British Steel, one of only 2 primary remaining steel works in the UK, with Tata Steel down in South Wales and obviously British Steel there in Scunthorpe. And then you've got Keadby, which is SSE's power generation, where they're just about to commission Keadby 2, which is the most effective CCGT in mainland Europe this year. But they also have ambitions with Equinor for Keadby 3, a post-combustion capture power plant, and also Keadby Hydrogen, the world's first 100% flexible hydrogen power station. And then at the end there, the jewel in the crown of the Humber, which is, and the UK actually, a great opportunity, the Drax biomass power station. The biggest biomass power station in the UK with 16 million tonnes of available bio-CO2, which we can either use for negative emissions or we can combine it with low carbon hydrogen to create critical low carbon fuels for those hard to decarbonise sectors such as aviation. So one more slide actually, my mistake Chris, so hold your horses. The last slide actually, H2H Saltend, just to focus in on that a little bit. The picture you can see there is the Saltend Chemical Park, and the big unit with the 3 towers you can see at the top is the Triton Combined Heat and Power Station. There's other users on that site. It's an integrated chemical park with Triton supplying critical power and steam, producing acetic acid, producing bioethanol, Nippon-Shire on site, and Tricoya and various others. So the aim is to produce a 600 megawatt hydrogen production facility based on blue hydrogen, so reforming of natural gas, capturing the carbon and putting it into that East Coast cluster system, and then fuel switching users across the chemical park to reduce the emissions in that first step by around 1 million tonnes per annum. From there, Equinor's ambitions are to step out, produce another 1.2 gigawatts of hydrogen, predominantly with blue but increasing amounts of green, and then to produce the Keadby hydrogen power station, the world's first 100% hydrogen power station by the end of the decade. So hopefully that gives you a good flavour of the Humber, and I'll now pass over to Chris from National Grid, who's leading on the infrastructure onshore. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Dan. So yes, we've heard a lot about the sort of potential within the Humber of the various plants and power stations, but actually how do we unlock all of that? And really the key to it all is the infrastructure. So using the same map that you've just seen Dan talk through, but rather than picking up on those key nodes along the way, I'm going to talk about the thread that runs right the way through the middle there. So the infrastructure we're proposing in the Humber is it's a parallel pipeline solution. So that's CO2 and hydrogen pipelines running in parallel right the way across the region. And the reason for that paralleling is actually to give those different sites options around decarbonisation. So that could be fuel switch, fuel from traditional fuels to a low carbon hydrogen, or it could be actually utilising the CO2 network to remove the emissions that would otherwise enter the atmosphere. So the proposed route, as you can see, is close to all of those large emitters, but it's also routed in such a way that actually you could add further emitters along that route. We know there's others there. We've had early conversations with a lot more emitters in the region than are shown on that map. The other key aspect of the infrastructure as it's currently designed is actually the right sizing of that. So we're talking about some significant sized pipelines, 17 million tonnes CO2 pipeline, a 10 gigawatt hydrogen pipeline. Those have been right sized or designed to be the size that would allow both first phase of projects to connect, but also future projects beyond that as well. But it's all a balancing act, so it's doing that whilst making sure that it remains value for money for the UK PLC and actually the customers that want to use it. As Dan touched on before, this is the onshore piece. It's key that it's connected to the offshore system that provides Humber with the access to the Endurance saline aquifer in the North Sea, the UK's best understood carbon store. And then by combining those two things, we end up with what is a very compelling end-to-end system from emitter right the way through to store. So how do we actually go about delivering that, and what are the timelines? So a key aspect of the critical path to delivering infrastructure in the UK is always around the planning regime and the DCO that's required to achieve that. And that's really what the centre of this slide is showing you. So where are we now? Well, we've just completed our first phase of non-statutory consultation, where we've been out and started talking to stakeholders and the public and engaging the community around our plans and potential route options across the region. We had a good level of feedback from there, and we'll be taking all the comments and feedback that we received and putting that back into future plans to make sure that we're really building on that community engagement and bringing people along with us. As we move into early 2022, we'll be going out and doing a second round of engagement with stakeholders, and that's to tie in at the same time as we step into FEED, front-end engineering and design, and really start pushing the project along. Fast forward to the end of next year, and we'll be looking at submitting our DCO application with the hope that, all going well, we receive a positive outcome for that in early 24. It's at that point in 24 that we can then step into construction, and we'll be constructing through 2024, 25, 26 and into 27. But the key date there is actually the first CO2 sequestration will take place in 26, and that's on the north bank of the Humber connecting into the Saltend system. And as I say, throughout that, what's absolutely key with all of this is the continuous community engagement. That's about bringing the public with us. It's about educating people on the benefits of CCS and hydrogen and the benefits that it can bring to the region. And then another aspect that's absolutely key to delivering infrastructure, and something that Dan touched on earlier in his slides, is the business models. So we've seen some good progress on business models, and BEIS has proposed that it will be a regulated asset-based model. That's building on the experience that we've had in oil and electricity and gas for many years now. It's a model that's tried and tested for assets such as the networks that we're proposing. The great thing about a model like that is actually it allows you to balance that anticipatory investment, so getting the system the right size that we talked about before, whilst also being economically attractive to both investors and customers. So by having that regulated model, we can attract the right investment into the networks to make sure they continue to grow and serve the growing base of customers that we see, whilst also offering an affordable option for decarbonisation. They've also been designed to be flexible, ensuring that we can react to changes in this young market that is going to grow, so we can continue to connect new emitters either through piped or shipped solutions. And building on that flexibility, the beauty of a regulated model is actually you have set periods that you work within, and that means that the security for both the networks but also the customers and the regulators, that actually there's a very clear business plan over the period of normally sort of 5 years that is going to be achieved during that period. But actually, if there's something that's not quite right there, then after the period you can look to adjust those key measures, metrics and incentives that network operators are measured against. And then from a national grid point of view, it draws exactly on the experience that we've had from electricity and gas network development and operation over the last 30 plus years. So National Grid is very used to successfully delivering within a regulated asset-based model, hence our involvement in developing this new infrastructure in the region and ensuring that it's a success. And so just to wrap up really there, as I say, infrastructure is going to be key to helping all of the emitters in the region achieve their ambition. The other key aspect to all of this is around skills and jobs. So I'll pass over to Ben, who can tell us a bit more on that.
Can you go, Ben?
Thank you very much, Chris. I just wanted to take the opportunity just to talk a little bit this afternoon about how the AMRC and our sister centre, the Nuclear AMRC, are supporting zero carbon Humber and the steps we're taking to try and maximise the benefit from projects like this and wider projects across the UK. So as we're talking a little bit about maximising value and levelling up, I wanted to just touch on Orgreave. So this is Orgreave in Rotherham in the UK, South Yorkshire, and this is what it looked like in 1984. So for decades it had enjoyed lots of industrial activity alongside Rotherham and steel and Sheffield steel industries, but saw through the late 1980s and the early 1990s huge amounts of deindustrialisation, which left a huge hole not only in the community but in the national ability to manufacture products, to make things, and it left high levels of unemployment and left real problems and deprivation for the region. So fast forward to 2021, and this is what the site looks like today. We've got assets right across the site from big industrial businesses that have joined the AMRC on this site and manufacturing very, very high value products. So for much of my career, I've been a manufacturing engineer, always driven by performance and about sustainability. And that's really what we're doing, whether in South Yorkshire or in North Wales, in the Northwest where we have facilities. We're really driving innovation to make things better, to make better products with better processes, and that's really the goal of the AMRC. So we've got about £300 million worth of investment in this region now, about 600 employees, but across the park there's more employees now employed in high value jobs than there were when Orgreave was actually in its pomp. And you can see hopefully at the back of the slide there, we've got housing, we've got schools, we've got communities being built up in this area as well. So it's what I would term well-rounded sustainability in terms of economic, social and environmental as well. So what are we doing in zero carbon Humber? Well, we're trying to support both the hydrogen and the CCUS supply chain. How are we doing that? Well, we're supporting the supply chain. We're looking at skills, and predominantly we're driving innovation as well. So how do we do it in terms of method? Well, we look at the shopping list of what's needed for the infrastructure. what pipelines needed, what major infrastructure and capability and process plant is needed. And we get the shopping list of that equipment, and then we start to look at the value. And when we understand the value and perhaps where the UK can play in that space, we're concurrently looking at supply chain mapping, and we're understanding the companies, the businesses, both large and small, right down to SME and micro businesses who can play in that space and actually, win some of the contracts and really make best use of that, and help the UK to scale this industry and really truly decarbonise. So what we're doing in the space is, as I say, we're looking at supply chain in terms of the value. We're looking at supply chain in terms of who's out there and who can pivot and work in that space, who's already there. But we are launching Fit for Hydrogen and Fit for CCUS as two supply chain intervention programs. So this works off a tried and tested method that the nuclear AMRC have used for the last 10 years, Fit for Nuclear programme. You can see the figures on there, they speak for themselves in terms of the impact that this has had over the last 10 years. And what we're doing is using this model to recreate that across hydrogen, CCUS, to try and absolutely maximise the economic benefit to the UK. So I think with that, I'll just talk finally on skills and training. So it's okay having innovation and making us really competitive and developing capability, capacity and competitiveness, but without skills and the people to actually do this, we really have nothing. They are the lifeblood of net zero. And at the AMRC Training Centre, we've seen about 1,500 young people go through the doors, all employed with jobs right at the start of their apprenticeship, going through advanced apprenticeships, some into degree apprenticeships, and really, adding value into the businesses that they work for. And that's a lot of small businesses in the region, but it's some of the big players, again, that you can see on screen. And I think this is a hugely important part of what we're talking about today. And I think with that, I will hand over back to Dan.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So I think now we're going to try and just have a general conversation amongst ourselves. I think what's interesting for maybe people who are watching is that this is a very strong consortium. There's 12 organisations in Zero Carbon Humber. There's 3 represented here. So we know each other well. So hopefully we've had a lot of these conversations before. So I think let's start, Ben, with you maybe, because I think the AMRC is a fascinating aspect of this consortium because it's quite unique. I chair the Sector Development Working Group on behalf of BEIS. And so driving skills and driving opportunities for UK SMEs is particularly close to my heart personally, but I think it's quite close to all our hearts. We're from the UK, obviously we're based up there in the north. So how do you think specifically that this AMRC programme can support the levelling up agenda that we hear so much about?
Well, I think there's just huge opportunity, and as I sort of mentioned previously, I think that's right from small SMEs, startups, micro businesses, right through to the tier ones and the OEMs. So I think what's really interesting with net zero, it's a huge paradigm shift, and there's technology and capability that we need that simply doesn't exist. Some of it is there, some of it, I dare say, kind of off the shelf, but some of it is very, very nascent, and we really need to scale that up. And I think, at the AMRC, really, I would say we're kind of colourblind to the hydrogen colour, whatever it is. We're working in green, we're working in blue, we'll be working in pink, whatever it is. I think that creates opportunity for UK PLC. So very much looking through the manufacturing lens, that provides massive opportunity, as you say, for levelling up for these businesses outside of the Golden Triangle, perhaps in the south, and lots of opportunity for the north in that area. But I was going to say, Dan, perhaps a question I can put back to you. I think people watching, maybe talk about blue or green hydrogen, and maybe some skeptics would say, well, the oil and gas businesses, we're going to push blue hydrogen. What would you say about that? We work in both, but
yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, the reality is scale. So, and the challenge is when you look at I mentioned at the start that the UK still emits over 400 million tonnes per year. I mean, we talk about the amount of renewable deployment, and Equinor are building the biggest wind farm in the UK at Dogger Bank with our partners SSE and Eni. We also built the world's first floating wind farm. So we understand the energy landscape extremely well. We're also the only commercial CCS operator in Europe. The issue is that you have to scale, and you have to scale quickly. You hear at COP the necessity, the climate emergency that we're in. So this isn't about a competition. You need all the tools in the box, but you need the right technology at the right scale at the right time. And the reality is that what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to grow a new market like the hydrogen economy with vast scale, guaranteed low carbon, and the government have just released a standard that we're consulting on about guaranteeing the low carbon, so you can get to that gigawatt scale quickly. And what the gigawatt scale does is it justifies the infrastructure, because you don't want to fill the ocean up with a tap. You need to justify the infrastructure with big supply and demand. And what that actually does then is facilitates more and more green hydrogen into that market because it's not constrained by the end user. Yeah. And the issue is that people often think of a technology as blue or green, but it's the system. We've only got so much renewable deployment. You can't rob Peter to pay Paul. So you can't just produce it all green. So you need other methods in the box, which is blue. Blue justifies the scale, facilitates green, and the great thing is what that does is it allows us to meet that 2050 target, 2035 target, but ultimately allows us to transition to that entirely sustainable position over time whilst meeting the pressing obligations of today. I don't know, Chris, if you want to.
I was going to just draw on your point around infrastructure as well. I think the other thing that we need to remember is with that low carbon standard that will apply to hydrogen, the infrastructure doesn't care if it's blue or green. Similarly to you guys, it's colourblind to whether it's blue or green. So if it's blue to begin with and it gets greener, great. But it doesn't matter. As you say, you get the value, the volumes early to help you to justify it in those regulated business models that we've touched upon, to actually develop the thing that you can then expand as you need to keep bringing it along. And also just to pick up on your point, Ben, around skills as well previously. Yeah, a lot of them are new skills and there's new technology in there, but actually there's also going to be a load of skills that we historically had that perhaps is now an ageing workforce. We're talking about building big infrastructure projects of pipelines that we've not done on that scale for a long time in this country. So bringing in that new generation of those skilled workers that can do that is equally as important as being able to develop the new stuff.
And I think that point actually about transferable skills is really important, Chris, because if you think of the traditional oil and gas industry, which high value jobs, secure jobs, but the great thing about this is a lot of those jobs are transferable actually. So the oil and gas industry, the CCS, you need the experts, you need the world's best, the best in class to deliver them systems effectively and safely. And you also need that in terms of deployment of these mega scale projects, these blue hydrogen projects, the infrastructure that's onshore. And indeed, as we were discussing on the train up here earlier actually, the floating wind farm concept came out of the oil and gas industry, using our expertise in offshore work to actually develop an offshore basis for floating wind farm, and Equinor were the first to build it in the world.
And it's those new technologies, it's those exciting technologies that, they attract engineers into the role. So again, we were touching on in 15 to 20 years, what are the jobs that, I've got 2 young children. What jobs are they going to want to go into? And it's it's solving these types of challenges, but we've got to break down the barriers and put things in place to make the skills and the education, the training, applicable but accessible. Right across the broad spectrum.
No, excellent. So as a follow-up question then, Ben. So from the AMRC, I get it because we've spent a lot of time talking through it, a lot of time. And I think it's, we're right at the start. We're on the cusp of these new markets, these game changer markets. CCS allowing decarbonisation of our critical industries, and then hydrogen, new markets, diversifying all sorts of end use from flexible power, ammonia, transport, potentially into heat,
Yep.
and obviously chemicals. But is it real? You know, the stuff with the AMRC, you know, yeah, we're going to get this UK capability for manufacturing. I mean, we've been offloading it for the last 40 years, haven't we? So, I mean, is it real?
Yeah.
Is there any real examples where we can actually do that? Because we're an expensive workforce in the UK, aren't we, to some place in the world? So
We
how's it
are,
work?
yeah. So labour costs are expensive. I think, you know, places in the rest of the world are rising. So where cheap labour was cheap, it's you know, becoming more expensive. But we can bat it out with the best of anyone globally, and we've got examples, you know, in terms of McLaren sports cars, McLaren Automotive, who now manufacture all their composite tubs, so the composite chassis that makes up the car, that's manufactured in Rotherham, the most competitive place globally to do that. And another example would be Boeing, who opened their first European manufacturing facility in Sheffield. Off the back of some work, they came to us probably 2013, 2014 and said, what do you know about manufacturing gears? What do you know about manufacturing gearboxes? And these are not the gearbox in your car, but not dissimilar. But they actuate the wings. So the flaps when you're coming up, coming down, and driving, you know, piloting the aircraft, driving, you know, moving the flaps and ailerons. So they're a high precision, high performance part. And they said, what do you know? We said, well, we've not done it before, but we've done a lot of machining. You know, we're kind of world leading in machining in that space. And we said, we'll give it a go. So we assembled a team, we trialled and tested methodologies, we went through a process that we go through, and we found an optimised method of manufacturing gears, a totally new method of manufacturing gears. Working with our partnership, we've got 120 members at the AMRC. We work with far more companies than that. We've got a really broad network, and we work right across the network to get to a process that was really highly competitive. And the other place this could have gone, by the way, was Mexico, and Sheffield was more competitive than that. So it's, you know, that kind of formulas around, we say the three-legged stool. So that's, you know, around driving innovation, which drives real global competitiveness. It's around skills. So, you know, we utilise the training centre. I think the average age of that facility at one stage was about 21. You know, really young workforce, 27 apprentices from across the region. And the apprentice training, just to touch back, the cohort that you know are in that facility, 82% of them are from the more deprived areas of the city regions, and you know, within that 10-mile kind of area. So it's making real social difference as well. It's giving lots of opportunities, but across the innovation, the skills, and developing the supply chain, and we have big supplier events to feed into this facility. You know, it gives a very highly competitive offering. And we've done it. We've done it with numerous partners right across, you know, sectors and across the world, and brought that inward investment back to the UK. So really, it's real.
So to summarise, and if a plane driver ever turns up, I'm getting off the plane. But,
that's why I'm an engineer, not a pilot.
Yeah, so I think so basically, Boeing wanted to make a set of gears. They were looking at Mexico and the UK, and through your process, they're now manufacturing them in Sheffield.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
a fantastic example, isn't it?
And you would hope that that's the first facility of, you know, of many, because we've got that competitive edge.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing about making it real is, with the focus on low carbon products, this becomes self-perpetuating. If you can decarbonise the industry in the area, then by default you're making lower carbon products, and you can hopefully attract then new entries into that area to help you actually deliver those low carbon.
So that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because what we're talking about there is we start manufacturing loads and more low carbon products, and we start taking advantage of these new markets, hydrogen, CCS, big UK supply chains. But if you're going to start doing that, are we going to increase the CO2 footprint of the products? So how do we ensure that if we're going to start manufacturing more, why should the UK, in terms of climate change obligations, are they at odds with job creation and economic benefit? Why should we do it in the UK? Yeah. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say it's climate. The climate crisis is a global problem. we're making these products, hydrogen infrastructure, CCUS, to try and solve this problem and trying to get back on the right track, to 1.5 degrees. And we've got to be, we can be more responsible in the UK. So for years, we've offshored product. Mm-hmm. More recently, with a drive for productivity, we've tried to reshore product. And now kind of a phrase that people are coining is green shoring. So we're trying to bring products back to the UK to green shore. And that's got lots of benefits. We can ensure the energy used to create the product is a renewable or a low carbon energy source, which drives down the embedded carbon hugely. Probably even before that, we can design the product, so we can design in circular economy principles, so that we can reuse, remake, recycle, upgrade these products that we're actually making in the first place. So secondary, we can control the energy, hopefully, and ensure it's lower carbon. And then thirdly, we're not shipping it three times around the world.
It's those carbon miles as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. If we're manufacturing things in Asia or across the world, how do you think it gets here? It gets here on massive container ships that burn a lot of diesel and kerosene, whatever it is, which is a problem. So it's about the UK taking real accountability for what it's doing, and apart from that, it's a great export opportunity as well.
No, I agree, and I think Chris, did you want to?
No.
I mean, I was going to say that I think what's important there is that these industrial clusters already are home to a lot of jobs. And so, to me, if you can decarbonise our industrial clusters, the products that are associated with them industrial clusters by default become green products. And one has to assume, if you're going to get to this net zero position, what's required for actual climate change action, really, that there will be a growing demand for green products.
Absolutely.
Because there has to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the only place you can really create green products is places with at-scale infrastructure for these critical process industries that can actually generate them.
Absolutely. I think the other important thing is when we talk about the jobs that we're creating, a lot of them are also safeguarded jobs in those industries that you're talking about
100%.
as well.
Yeah. And I think the other thing there, what we're talking about, Ben, is if we can get the manufacturing, if we can drive that inwards investment to those regions, we not only safeguard the jobs, but what we're able to do is effectively create lots of new jobs, but in a manufacturing process that can actually take advantage of these low carbon systems, the hydrogen networks, the CCS if that's required, to actually not only drive inwards investment and new jobs, but actually create more and more globally exportable green products.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like a win-win.
Yeah, and I think in terms of developing the advanced manufacturing processes and really driving them into the green economy in terms of infrastructure for industrial decarbonisation, they're transferable. There's a horizontal innovation piece here into land transport or aviation or other large emitters. So you're driving the baseline of manufacturing capability up, which is just really important for the economy as a whole.
So if before we maybe move on to a bit about the CCS and hydrogen stuff, if there's SMEs watching, Ben, who are thinking, right, these new markets, I don't know anything about them, hydrogen, CCS, what should they do? Should they be contacting you? Is the regulation in place? Is there somewhere they can go, or is that what we're trying to develop? What would you say to them SMEs?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is for them, to contact us, to get in touch with the AMRC, the nuclear AMRC, the wider high value manufacturing catapult network, which can really support and guide SMEs in what they can do and who they can be talking to. We don't have to intervene with every single manufacturer that comes to us, but we do some signposting. You need to talk to them, or you can join this association, or you can sign up to this newsletter, and a lot of it is just about communication. In terms of the regulatory processes, I'd probably throw that back to you, Dan. It's a broad topic, and that can mean a lot of things in different areas in terms of assets or operations or manufacturing, regulations, etc. So, kind of interested on.
Yeah, I've given myself a curveball, haven't I? So I think regulation's interesting, isn't it?
It's
because
absolutely.
and I know that there's a sector, like the sector development working group, there's a regulation and standards working group, and I think a lot of people are confused actually.
Yeah.
Because there's regulations, which might be, for example, the pipeline safety regulations, which are how you own and operate a pipeline safely within legal standards. And then the specifications, which is if you're going to manufacture this, it needs to be this spec and this certification. And then there's regulatory frameworks, which is the commercial model for how we actually deliver, such as what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so that, in that case, we're talking more around the economic regulatory regime of how do you make the business models stack up for the industry. So who's actually paying to use the infrastructure, and how do you make that, the checks and balance work on that? Because coming back to what we've just been talking about making industry more competitive and stuff, if you start whacking on fees onto industry to use that infrastructure, then you're negating the benefit you're getting, which is exactly why you need the sort of right regulation and make sure that the costs are picked up correctly across sort of the wider UK PLC and customer base, whilst making sure that it attracts the right investment into the infrastructure and can help it continue to grow.
I mean, one of the things I find quite confusing, and I suppose I'm as involved in this as probably anybody, is how you piece it all together.
Yeah.
It's about knowledge dissemination. How do you share this knowledge so everybody can coalesce around this common goal and this shared value, and everybody has chance to pitch in?
Yeah.
And so, you know, at the moment, I think it's a bit of a problem. Well, it's not a problem, but obviously the competitive nature of the cluster sequencing process means there is an actual competition ongoing.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that Zero Carbon Humber, and I'd like your reflections, Chris, has done as a consortium, is we've also signed up to a knowledge charter and a professional approach to knowledge dissemination. So what's your view on kind of that, and how we should?
As you were starting to intro that piece around how do we build those links on knowledge management, Zero Carbon Humber is a prime example of bringing together large industry players and partners to actually achieve some of that perhaps traditionally wouldn't have done so. I think you're right that actually as the cluster sequencing process has rolled on, maybe there's created a little bit of tension there between some of those partners, which is unfortunate but necessary to get us through the process that we've got. But I think there's an importance of sharing that knowledge within the industry, but it's wider than that as well. I think we need to get that knowledge out to public and to communities, and as I pointed out on the slide that I presented earlier, actually having that community engagement is absolutely key to getting these things off the ground. We've seen public opposition to major projects before, but being able to do that professionally and bring people along with you and get the public excited, and the people there should be excitement around these schemes for all the reasons that we've talked about already today. Is absolutely key to doing that, and National Grid has experience in delivering these major infrastructure projects and bringing communities along with us, and whether that's community initiatives or education centres or whatever else it might be, we've got those sort of experiences. But it's not just us in the consortium that have got experiences like that. Equinor have clearly got a lot of knowledge management experience and knowledge sharing, as have the likes of Drax and some of the local initiatives that they've kicked off in terms of engaging with schools and ensuring that they're starting to think about their future supply chain of skills coming in.
So let's explore this thing about the public a bit then, because it's always a question that gets levelled at us whenever we're at conferences together, or I'm sure independently. Because there's one thing about a process, which is a planning and consenting process, which everybody does on major projects. But that's a formal process. So how do we get the public on board, and how do we get them? Because the way I look at it, being from that region, is I'm incredibly proud of it. I know my family are incredibly proud of it. Maybe of me, but of it. But they are incredibly proud of it. And I think that you should be shouting from the rafters. This could, you know, Zero Carbon Humber, as well as with the Teesside guys with under the East Coast Cluster, could create like an international lighthouse of low carbon technologies, hydrogen, CCS, that the world comes to look at? How do you engage the public? How do you create that pride?
Yeah, I think it's about exposure to what we're doing, and I think it's, as an engineer, quite often I'll overcomplicate things. I'll use complex jargon, and it's about simplifying it, not dumbing it down, but simplifying it and making it really clear to understand. So that's clear to understand the benefits to, globally in terms of the decarbonisation and the benefit to the UK. But very quickly, I think it's dialing it down to the benefit of what it means for the region. And, I think there's a real opportunity with Zero Carbon Humber in terms of bringing, a level of pride. I won't say back to the region, because it's a very, very, incredibly proud region, but, almost enhancing that, raising it up, because that's the opportunity, right now. And I think, as I say, from the manufacturing side, when you're spending a lot of money on big infrastructure projects, obviously a lot of this will be private money, but we're looking that there'll be some government investment as well. We want to be making sure that taxpayers' money is being spent with local business, and and the local communities can see that. So if it feels like a big ticket, a big number, actually, well, so-and-so down the road's doing this and so-and-so's doing that, and people are engaged in the programme. And
Chris, what do you think? Let's try and give some specific examples. How do we get conversations around the dinner table, kids inspired?
I think we can do so much in terms of engaging with the sort of stakeholders that we engage with, but I think we need help in some of this as well. So I know various members of our organisation in terms of Zero Carbon Humber are also involved in the industrial cluster plan, which works very closely with the local enterprise partnership to make sure that those messages are getting out through their networks to the local businesses and doing some of the stuff that Ben's talking about. But I think the other thing we need is local advocacy for sort of this through key members of the community, be that MPs, and we've had some good engagement with the local MPs and they can clearly see the benefit. We need that to continue, albeit other sort of leaders in the area. And I think we don't have all the answers at the moment as to how you exactly drive that down into having those conversations around the dinner table, but I think we just need to be cognizant as this project progresses that we are engaging with those right sort of community leaders and civic leaders that can actually help own the message and push it down as well for us.
First thing I'd say, Dan, is to get people to ask what is Zero Carbon Humber. So whether that's sponsoring a football team, putting it on the side of a bus, or putting it on a TV advert after the local news, it's about to say, what is Zero Carbon Humber? What does it mean? Because the Humber's in the title. They know people are going to know it's about the region, but they don't know what it is. So it's about having the conversation, like you say, around the dinner table. And
I mean, I think for me, because I think all of them are good, and I think they're good ideas. But for me, I think that you need to get to many conversations. So you can't just have a group of companies advocating. You have to have, like you said, you have to have the region advocating, you have to have the local authorities advocating, but actually you have to go and talk to the communities. And not necessarily us, but everybody should be doing it. I think at a national level there needs to be an education programme so people understand that CCS is a necessity, it's not an option. That's the recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change. That hydrogen is a great value proposition, essential in meeting net zero. That it's not actually about a competition between renewables and these other things. You need everything. Absolutely. The challenge is too great. Absolutely. So that we can stop polarised debates on competition and have everyone advocating, let's just get on with it. So I think, and then it's fundamental into the education syllabus, so that your kids are coming home and they're actually telling you what they're learning at school. So I think there's a big piece to be done there.
I think we've seen announcements in the last week or so around actually getting those initiatives into the curriculum.
I think that's important. Positive. Conversations around the dinner table, I think that's important. So as you're talking with your kids and your families tonight, maybe that's a topic we could all bring up. So just moving on then, because I think we're maybe getting close to time, but just in terms of CCUS then, Chris, and hydrogen and the infrastructure side of things. So National Grid were involved in the White Rose project back in 2015, and obviously there was the Peterhead project that I think Equinor were involved in as well. Massive U-turn, huge huge step backwards for industry, and I think probably fair to say a bit of a loss of confidence. What's different?
Well, I think you alluded to a lot of this in some of your early slides in terms of that. I think you used the term stars aligning. I think we've seen not only that commitment in legislation to a net zero target, which is absolutely key to getting some of this off the ground. We are continually seeing the commitment from government through the announcements that they're making, not just about the CCS stuff, but specific points that support that around low carbon hydrogen targets by 2030, greenhouse gas removals by 2030, and sort of the 5 million tonnes and the 5 gigawatt targets that they've put in place there. I think that continual iteration of the messages is key in terms of making sure that it stays front of mind and that at some point someone doesn't just strike it off the spending plan. But I think the criticality of time as well. 2030 isn't actually that far away when you're talking about building these sort of things. So the timeline I put up earlier, we're talking about 26 before we get the first CO2 away. As it is, any sort of delay and you're pushing right up against your 2030 target. And we are one of the largest clusters, but it's going to be equal challenges for other clusters as well in terms of delivering infrastructure within the timelines. So I think that criticality is key. I think the legislation has been a massive supporter to it. I'd also like to say that actually, although there was the huge U-turn in 2015 and very disappointing for everybody involved, I think what's heartening to see is actually we've got a lot of the same players come back to the table, which...
Round 2.
Yeah, or round 3 for some, actually. Which I don't think should be underestimated in terms of that clear commitment from those players that have been stung before to come back and do this again. But not only are they back, they've brought all that knowledge from previous. So it's not like that all the work that happened last time around has been forgotten and thrown away. It's being reworked and built upon. So what do you think? Well,
I was going to say to Ben, actually, because I agree broadly with everything you said, Chris, but I think the other thing is, do you think that now, especially if you think about the economic benefits, do you think there's a driver to be first out the blocks? Because as the world's talking about it, you know, everybody's realising that actually it's probably harder than we first thought. We can't just go down, we can't just have a one-trick pony here. We need everything. Do you think there is a pressure to be first out the blocks? And does the first out the blocks give you the best advantage in terms of SMEs, manufacturing, productivity, export? What do you think there's a driver there?
I think so. I think so hugely. I think, you know, now is the opportunity to really drive this. And I think, you know, the commitments that we're getting, you know, that are going into law, it gives businesses more certainty. And you know, when you're investing in manufacturing capability, you need certainty, not over 12 months, 24 months. You know, you need that 5-year, 10-year commitment where if you're buying big assets, and some advanced manufacturing capability, you know, it costs a lot of money. We're talking millions of pounds, and big facilities, you know, 10 times that. So it's about having certainty and then being able to manage their risk whilst getting up the maturity scale, being able to do this. It's not, you know, it's doing it's one thing, doing it competitively globally is another. But if you get there first past the post, you know, then at that point with decarbonised energy and a world-leading product puts you in a very, very good position for exporting and leading the world on this.
So I suppose in summary we're saying time criticality, legislation that's now in place, necessity, for example, the net zero target, first out the blocks. Let's make sure the UK gets the best advantage by being the first move in this low carbon space.
I think the positive progress we've seen on business models this time around as well helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having that diversity of users and having a clear business model is going to help support it this time as well.
So another topic then for us to maybe discuss, safety. It's another thing that constantly gets asked, and it's a fair question. You know, it's a good question, and rightly so it should be asked. So in terms of hydrogen and CCS, what's your views on the safety position for it?
Well, make no mistake, safety is always a key priority for everything the National Grid does. So if we didn't think it was safe, we wouldn't be involved. That said, clearly we're talking about huge assets with gases in them that are either flammable or otherwise harmful that we need to manage. So there's been a huge amount of work, and this is some of the work that we've talked about previously in terms of recycling some of the work that we've done. There was a huge amount of work done last time around in a whole research programme around safely transporting CO2 in the UK and what that means. We can bring all of that experience to bear on the project that we're doing now. So we are engineering that safety in, and we'll be making sure that we're obviously bringing the safety regulators along with us. In terms of offshore safety, clearly outside of our necessary remit, but clearly they are safe operators. They're used to operating in that marine environment with liquids and gases that are hazardous. And in terms of store safety, you said yourself, Endurance is one of the best geological formations that we've got in the UK in terms of its geological structure. There is a high degree of confidence that once the CO2 is in there, it's safe. But clearly there will be monitoring in place as well. But I guess from a hydrogen point of view, maybe you're better to talk to that than I am from an Equinor point of view.
Yeah, fair point. So I think, well, firstly, just on the CCS, actually, I think what people often don't realise, and why would you? Because everybody's, in the UK, and it's often quite a parochial conversation. But actually, Equinor are the only commercial CCS operator in Europe. So I think the first thing I always say to this safety question is we've been capturing, transporting and storing CO2 safely at Sleipner for 25 years, 1 million tonnes per year, so well over 20 million tonnes stored safely. We also built the first onshore to offshore CO2 transport and storage system called Snøhvit, which actually means Snow White. I learned the other day. It's quite an interesting side fact. Which has been storing, I think it's around 800,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum safely. And we're now building Northern Lights, which will be the world's first shipping CO2 import terminal to gather the CO2 from those areas that don't have infrastructure and transport it in. I think and the thing to remember just before I move on to hydrogen actually is that we're incredibly lucky in the UK because we have everything. So if you look at CCS in terms of capability, between the UK continental shelf and the Norwegian continental shelf, we have over 2/3 of the CO2 storage capability for Europe. And that's because we've got such fantastic geology. The Endurance store, by the way, one of our geophysicists described it to me as the best geological store he's ever seen. So incredibly fortuitous. So not only does that allow us to accelerate our own low carbon ambitions with blue hydrogen and carbon capture and storage from relevant industries, but actually it also allows us to potentially act as a management system for wider Europe, which is a great add for the UK, and I suppose from an SME point of view, same thing, jobs. Yeah. From a hydrogen point of view, the thing to remember is the hydrogen industry is not new. No. So for the last 40 to 50 years, the world has added between 3.5 and 7.5 gigawatts of hydrogen every year. The only thing that's new about it now is we're doing it in a low carbon sense, where we can decarbonise a diverse range of markets. Traditionally, it's been used as grey hydrogen, just reform natural gas, emit the CO2, use it in the chemicals industry, ammonia for farming. Well, we can still do that because you still need ammonia for farming, but actually we can do it in a low carbon way with blue and green hydrogen, and not only producing things like ammonia for export or potentially for maritime fuel, but for flexible power generation, for production of steel, for decarbonisation of chemicals, for transport, such as heavy goods vehicles and trains, and maybe for decarbonisation of heat, such as we set out in our H21 North of England report. And I think the key point is that managing any energy vectors, you have to know what you're doing. And the energy industry, in whatever industry it is, whether it's electric, gas or anything, puts in place appropriate safety measures to ensure it's managed safely, and I think that's probably the key message. And this is not first of a kind stuff. It's first of a kind in terms of its application, but also in terms of the UK.
And I think just to add, Dan, the world, the UK, and more broadly the world, are in the grips of the fourth industrial revolution. Called the fourth industrial revolution, and this is really digitalisation of industry. So it's using, more sensors, more connectivity, and capturing more data, and then doing something with it. So what it means is we can assure greater product quality for hydrogen processing, for pipe work, for all this type of stuff, both through the manufacture of it, but also in process. It's pretty good and has been very good for in process anyway. But you are almost elevating the in process, but you can feed that information back into the manufacturing process as well. So you're getting greater quality and greater traceability, and that supports the driving of standards, which of course we're working on, the manufacturing standards through Zero Carbon Humber as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So I suppose my last question would maybe be around the hydrogen economy, Chris. So obviously in the Humber, I think the unique value proposition of the Humber, besides all the great industries are there, is it's a parallel pipeline system. Yep. It's CO2 and hydrogen transmission. And I always say at conferences that you need three things to get to net zero in an industrial cluster. You need carbon capture and storage for those industries that can't fuel switch, and also to produce at-scale blue hydrogen. You need hydrogen for those industries that can fuel switch, which can obviously be facilitated to sustainable over time, and you need an element of BECCS to also set those hard to reach emissions. So, and we're already seeing this parallel system being copied in places around the world. So the hydrogen transmission system, because we've spent a lot of time on the CCS, how important do you think that is in terms of meeting the government's 5 gigawatt targets and indeed the Committee on Climate Change's recommendations?
Well, I think it's key. As you've just talked about there, I mean, you can generate hydrogen and create the hydrogen in a location, but the likelihood is you're not going to utilise it right on the doorstep of where that hydrogen's being produced. And that's exactly what we see in the Humber. We're talking about hydrogen production in sort of Saltend and Immingham areas, but actually some of your large use cases there is Keadby. So you need that level of hydrogen transmission to get the hydrogen from where it's being produced in its low carbon way with the CO2 to actually where you can best utilise it. And the example we're talking about obviously in the Humber is around that sort of Keadby through the fuel switch, but also other users along the route. So we know British Steel are there, perhaps they could use it for some of their activities, and we've got other industries that in the region that could potentially use that low carbon hydrogen. I think having the two pipelines together makes sense because you're pushing CO2 one way while taking the hydrogen the other way. And actually, as I said early on as well, it gives those users that flexibility and optionality around how do you actually decarbonise. And it might not necessarily be a one-size-fits-all, there might be a blend of carbon capture and hydrogen switch.
And I would imagine as well, Chris, that building pipelines causes a level of short-term disruption. I mean, the beauty is that actually once you finish, you can't tell it's there. That's the beauty, because the UK's got pipelines everywhere, obviously. So I think another benefit maybe with the parallel pipeline system is that public engagement, that we come in and it's like the Carlsberg advert, isn't it? Let's put them in at the same time, and hopefully then you can get the basis to get to net zero, whilst also giving you the basis to expand out beyond the industrial clusters to decarbonise wider energy sectors.
And that's the other importance about the right sizing of these things as well, because what we don't want to do is stick in a pipeline that works for the first two people to connect to it, be that the hydrogen pipeline or the CO2 pipeline, or both of them, and then find 2-3 years down the line we've got to go back in, take that pipe out or expand that pipe or put a second one in, because that's absolutely right. Yeah, you want to minimise that disruption on people as we go through.
And I think in my utopian mind, or my simple mind, you should have this hydrogen pipeline that is creating the world's first low carbon economy with a diversity of end users and a diversity of production capability from blue and green, which stimulates as much of the supply chain as possible, but also doesn't artificially limit growth, because you've got all the different end users and you've got all the different producers who can connect into what is now a market. It's not a localised project, it's a localised market that can then expand out into a national and international market. Would you agree with that? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. It's about scaling it, isn't it? Yeah. It's having the ability to scale it, as you say, across from the Humber, into West Yorkshire, you know, right across the north, and you know, right across the UK, because that's where the real value will come.
Okay,
I
excellent.
think that diversity is key as well, because actually you've got a certain level of redundancy on the projects there as well, and forward thinking as well, because some of the projects that you might connect early on might not be there for as long as all of them. So it allows you to make sure that that asset isn't being underutilised.
So it's low regrets.
Indeed.
Low regrets. So I think we're just about out of time, so I'd probably, to maybe wrap it up in a nice way, maybe it's worth us all just commenting on, I think we've hopefully given a good overview of zero carbon Humber, but maybe it's just worth giving a comment on what do you think are the real benefits of it? Why should it be supported? Why should the government 100% back this zero carbon Humber and by default the wider East Coast cluster and really accelerate it?
I think just the many different facets that we've talked about today that the Humber has as a region just gives us a real opportunity to be world leading, and as we talked about, it allows us or gives us opportunity to really do it at pace, which from an economic point of view and a manufacturing point of view gives us opportunity to really world lead, and it's very exciting.
Okay, Chris?
I think sheer scale of the Humber region and obviously being the largest emitting region in the UK, I think it's obviously a big step to go big to begin with, but playing to Ben's point in terms of actually building it scale quickly, you go for the biggest fruit first, don't you? But just more broadly, I think the focus should be on the value as well, because it's all too easy to focus on the cost and forget about the value that some of this can bring. And a lot of our conversation has focused around that value. So I would urge that focus on value.
Well, okay, thanks, Chris. So I think my comment would possibly be that there's several factors, and all of them are relatively unique. We've looked at industrial clusters all over Europe, and the Humber is unique. It has the scale, like you rightly suggest, and the scale allows us to drive down cost, which is what we did with the wind sector.
Yep.
So the scale gives us the ability to drive down cost. It has diversity, which means that we can showcase all these low carbon technologies, and we can showcase them with industries and businesses that have got the financial stability, credibility and ambition to deliver. And what that allows us to do is replicate into the other industrial clusters, not just in the UK, but internationally. Because it's not about the UK meeting its climate change obligations, it's about globally meeting them. So replicate, but also I think that you've got the unique, to use the government's phrase, a super place, or as I like to call, as we all know, a super duper place. So you knew I'd say it, right? Where basically you've got the perfect combination of renewables, which is like Dogger Bank and the Hornsey wind farms land on the south bank, Dogger Bank on the north bank, as well as up at Teesside. CCS with the southern North Sea, vast amount of CO2 storage capability, unlimited in terms of capacity, and hydrogen, both blue and green. So you actually have everything to produce what is a true super duper place.
I think fold into that negative emissions as well from BECCS is key.
Yeah, negative emissions from BECCS as well as potentially biofuels, which are also essential to decarbonise in some of those other hard to decarbonise sectors. So I think with that probably draws us to a close. Hopefully it's been a useful debate for everybody. I think we'd put a big shout out on behalf of the AMRC to please contact them if you're an SME. It's only through contacting them and putting your hand up that we can really start to share that knowledge and see where you can play in what should be a really exciting space, new exciting markets for the UK that not only create jobs and economic benefit, but allow us to meet our low carbon and climate change obligations. Okay, so with that, I think we'll end there. So good evening.
Thank you.